February 6, 1685. Whitehall Palace, those stone walls that once echoed with splendor, are now filled with the cold silence of death. Panic reigns in the royal chamber. Physicians, hands trembling, mix medicines, mumble prayers, try every remedy, but in vain. Charles II, King of England, is about to pay the price for a life steeped in pleasure. He was no ordinary sovereign. This was the man who transformed the English court into Europe's greatest den of iniquity. A monarch who had the most mistresses among kings. A ruler remembered more for lust than for politics. And a legacy he left behind, not just laws, treaties, or wars, was a heritage that lived on in the illegitimate children scattered across the nation. Now, 54, his body is weary, his face pale. Every pleasure he had desired throughout his life has finally caught up with him. The words that escape his lips in his last breath belong neither to God, nor to his kingdom, nor to his family. They belong to a woman. "Do not let poor Nellie starve," he whispers. A final request for his mistress, the people's favorite, the star of the stage, Nell Gwyn. And in that moment, the most hedonistic king in English history closes his eyes forever. Behind every shadow lies a story. In this video, we will bring them to light together. Like and share where you're watching from in the comments. Charles's story is the tale of an era when pleasure seized power. But to understand this story, we need to go back to 1630, to a child born to the throne but shaped in exile. Charles was the son of King Charles I and the French princess Henrietta Maria. He grew up amidst the civil war that tore England apart, even as a child. At the age of 19, he witnessed his father's execution by Parliament. That scene, a king kneeling and submitting his head to the executioner, remained a scar in his mind. And that scar taught him a lifelong lesson. Power is fleeting, life is short. Therefore live, enjoy, savor it. While England became a Puritan republic under the stern rule of Oliver Cromwell, Charles fled to France. There, in the court of Louis XIV, he saw a different world. A world where power and pleasure mingled, where love and intrigue reigned. Louis's court was the throne not only of kings, but also of passions. Charles quickly learned the rules of this new world. To be a king meant not just to rule, but to take what you wanted. And when he returned to England, ascending the throne in 1660, he was a completely different man, tall, charismatic, dangerously attractive. But most importantly, insatiable. His first love was an already married woman, Barbara Villiers. Thus, the doors of scandal were opened. Even when Charles married the Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza in 1662, he did not abandon Barbara. Instead, he placed her right next to his queen as a lady of the bedchamber. The court was instantly filled with whispers. Barbara was not just a mistress. She was a woman of great power in the palace. She sold offices, steered politics, and plundered the royal treasury. But Charles would not hear a single word against her. He protected her like a goddess. And then, their numbers increased. A succession of mistresses, actresses, nobles, servants. Whitehall Palace ceased to be a center of government and turned into a theater of royal desires. The court was now the capital of lust, not of England. Among these women, one name stood out, Nell Gwyn. She was neither noble nor educated, but she won Charles's heart with her wit, humor, and common touch. She shone like the voice of the people amidst the splendor of the court. She loved to mock herself, saying, "I am the Protestant whore," a swipe at the king's Catholic mistresses. The public loved her with laughter, and the king with passion. And so began the story of Charles II, known as the Merry Monarch of English history. But his merriment was a darkness that would forever change the morals of a nation. Their relationship lasted nearly 15 years, producing 2 illegitimate children. But Nell was not alone. There were other women around the king. The French aristocrat Louise de Keroualle was a political pawn secretly sent by Louis XIV, but she quickly became Charles II's most trusted favorite. Then came Hortense Mancini, the seductive niece of Cardinal Mazarin, famous across Europe for her bisexuality. and Catherine Sedley, sharp-tongued, fearless, and perhaps too intelligent for the king to handle. The number of the king's mistresses was met with astonishment even within court circles. But the real issue was not the number, but the brazenness. Charles didn't bother to hide his lovers. He took them to state ceremonies, bestowed titles upon them, and even allowed them to meddle in politics. Poor Queen Catherine had to endure it all with a fake smile, watching her rivals sashay in jewelry bought with her husband's money. The expenses reached unimaginable proportions. Charles lavished mansions, titles, and fortunes upon his lovers. Barbara Villiers was rewarded not just with a dukedom, but with a massive annual salary of £4,700, one of the largest fortunes of the time. And, of course, the children. Charles officially acknowledged 14 illegitimate offspring, but rumors suggested the number exceeded 20. Many received noble titles, thus creating a new aristocracy born not of marriage, but of royal lust. The most famous was James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, born to Lucy Walter. With no legitimate heir from Queen Catherine, some began to view Monmouth as the closest contender for the throne. This claim would eventually turn into an open rebellion. But Charles II's indulgences were not limited to the bedroom. The secret parties held behind palace walls quickly became urban legends. In these private meetings, the king, along with a select few, engaged in wild orgies, indulging in pleasure parties away from the official court eyes. The king's lifestyle changed not just the court, but the morality of England itself. The strict Puritan ethics of the Cromwell era disappeared almost overnight. Forbidden relationships were now fashionable. Nobles tried to push their wives into the king's sight, believing that if they could capture his attention, they would gain political advantage for their families. This was not just a scandal. It was also a strategy, and it cost a fortune. The king nearly drained the royal treasury to support his mistresses and their households. He constantly demanded money from Parliament. When denied, he turned his eyes to France. Louis XIV, under the guise of friendship, generously supported the king with subsidies, bribes. And much of this money went straight into the pockets of Charles's lovers. But the gossip didn't stop. The women were getting younger, sometimes much younger. Catherine Sedley was not yet 20 when she attracted the king's attention. Some of his lovers were in their adolescence. As Charles aged, the age gap with his lovers visibly widened. In the streets and salons, people whispered about the king's predatory behavior. Moreover, the issue was not just the age difference. Charles II was not only a king, but also the supreme governor of the Church of England. He was the head of the faith, but his personal life was the very opposite of every value the Church preached. He did not hide his lovers. He displayed them like spoils and brought his illegitimate children to the center of power. This hypocrisy infuriated many clerics. Some even refused to preach in his presence. Conversations about virtue, chastity, and self-control were no longer held at court. Morality was drowning in champagne and lust. And beyond all this decay, there was a dark shadow. The king's French mistress, Louise de Keroualle, was secretly corresponding with King Louis XIV of France, accused of espionage. Many diplomats believed that, under her influence, England's foreign policy was steered in favor of France. Louis had understood Charles's weakness better than anyone. To buy him, it was enough to use his desires, not gold. And thus, the royal bedroom became a new stage for international diplomacy. By the time Charles reached 50, his once dazzling charm had long faded. His black hair was streaked with gray, and his famous smile had become a weary mask. Years of pleasure and grandeur had left deep marks on both his body and soul. Now everyone whispered the same thing. The king is not what he used to be. The rumors circulating in the palace corridors were darker. Some claimed he had contracted syphilis. Others saw his decline as God's punishment. Whatever the cause, his health was rapidly deteriorating. Charles tried to curb his self-indulgence in his final years, but it was too late. No matter how much wine he drank from silver goblets, there was no holy drink sacred enough to wash away his past sins. The people of London were ruthless. In pamphlets sold in the streets, the king was mocked with his stud mares. In caricatures, the court was likened to a stable. The monarchy, once a symbol of nobility, had become the public source of entertainment. And finally, on the morning of February 6, 1685, the curtain fell at Whitehall Palace. Charles II, once Europe's most charming king, was now a powerless shadow in bed, surrounded by panicked doctors. They bled him, boiled herbs, tried all kinds of medicines, but nothing helped. The heart of the kingdom was about to stop. In those last moments, Charles neither summoned a priest nor confessed his sins. He spoke neither of God nor of his wife. His final words belonged to a lover, a memory, a sin. Do not let poor Nellie starve. And so, the most hedonistic king in English history quietly passed away. But even death could not close his story. Those who remained continued to debate his legacy. Some remembered him as the savior king who reopened theaters and revived the arts after the period of Puritan oppression. Others, as a sinner who sacrificed the throne to his pleasures. Charles's passions had shaped not only the court, but also the future. He left no legitimate heir, but he left behind countless illegitimate children scattered throughout the kingdom. These children eventually founded their own dynasties. A new class of nobles was born, exiled from the palace but carrying royal blood. One of them, James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, ignited a rebellion that would be etched into history. He sought to seize the throne after his father's death and paid the price with his head. But even his death was not enough to erase the shadows of the past. Centuries passed, yet Charles's name continued to echo in the family trees of England's great families. Even today, there are those among England's bankers, lords, and newspaper owners who carry his blood. Charles II, unknowingly, had become one of the true founders of modern British aristocracy, and his influence was not limited to lineage. In theater, music, fashion, his traces were everywhere. The Restoration-era theaters were mirrors of his court, cheeky, bold, and full of scandal. Writers like John Dryden and William Wycherley pushed the boundaries of morality, bringing the king's spirit to the stage. A little wit, a little lust, a little hypocrisy. Today, historians still debate. Was Charles II a savior or the architect of collapse? But no matter which side one is on, the truth is undeniable. Charles showed everyone that even kings consecrated with divine authority were human. And perhaps this is why he is still remembered. Because he was a crowned sinner. Charles II did not merely rule from a throne. He ruled from a bed. And his court operated like a brothel adorned with velvet robes and gold crowns, forming one of the most scandalous chapters in British history. His court was not just immoral, it staged its immorality. What set him apart was not just the king's personal pursuit of pleasure, but how these pursuits shaped England's culture of power. Pleasure had become a political tool. Mistresses held influence, though not formally named ministers. The royal bedroom became a second court where real power was negotiated with whispers and moans, not in Parliament. The court itself turned into a stage, much like Restoration-era theater. Everyone knew their role. The queen, patient and devout. The mistresses competing for the king's attention. The illegitimate children groomed for noble titles. Some courtiers even moved their wives and daughters like chess pieces, trying to put them in the king's line of sight. In this inverted world, virtue was a weakness, and scandal was a tool for rapid ascent. One of the most striking symbols of this order was the empowerment of women at court. But this power was gained not through marriage or noble birth, but through seduction. Barbara Villiers, the mother of 5 of the king's illegitimate children, received the title Duchess of Cleveland and became one of the most influential women in the country. Louise de Keroualle, the French mistress, became the Duchess of Portsmouth. She was rewarded with lands and fortunes, but secretly reported to Versailles. These women were not ornaments, but agents of power, gateways of influence, and even international spies. Even Nell Gwyn, an actress from the poor neighborhoods of Covent Garden, rose to the center of England's most elite circles. Her humble origins and connection to the people made her a vivid contrast to court elitism. and she was deeply loved by the king. Each mistress added a different color to the throne, and each, knowingly or unknowingly, helped Charles create a new concept of monarchy. But the weight of this lifestyle could not be carried forever. As Charles aged, the court began to decay. Elegance faded, excesses became grotesque, debts mounted, and bribes from foreign states became more frequent. Parliament was weary, and the public had lost trust. And as Charles's health deteriorated, a new fear spread. What would happen when he died? He had no legitimate heir. The crown would pass to his Catholic brother, James. Yet the country was a staunchly Protestant society. The very thing Charles had avoided all his life, the return of religious conflict, was now at the door. All of it was the consequence of his refusal to produce a legal heir. Yet the king was not foolish. He knew what he was doing, using every scandal, every affair, every controversial appointment as a long-term game. He distracted the nobles, baffled Parliament, and held on to power. He played his long game and, in many respects, won. He reigned for 25 years, longer than most rulers who played it straight. He survived plots, plagues, fires, and coups with his power and charm. He ruled with admiration instead of fear, and people could not stop watching. Today, even 300 years after his death, Charles II is still remembered as one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in English history. His reign is recalled as a period of rebirth and sin, art and self-indulgence, beauty and betrayal. An era when the monarchy was both respected and mocked. A time when a king could rule from the throne and fall into his mistress's arms in the same breath. Charles rebuilt the English monarchy, but he also redefined the monarchy. He turned the kingdom into a theater, politics into a spectacle, and pleasure into a state policy. He proved that charisma could be as powerful as bloodline, and that scandal, when managed correctly, could be a weapon of strategy. But he also revealed how destructive unbridled desire could be. When he wore a crown, he laid bare how lust could shape a nation. So what was Charles II's true legacy? Was he a hero who saved England from Puritan darkness, or a villain who stained the monarchy with pleasure and self-indulgence? Was he a victim of his own traumas, perhaps deeply wounded by the years of exile and his father's execution? Or was he simply a man who pursued pleasure and desires over duty? Perhaps he was all of these things combined. Au king, au libertine, au survivor, au seducer, au chouman, au cochoneriteur. He left no legitimate heir, but left behind hundreds, perhaps thousands, of echoes, an influence still felt in the bloodlines of the British aristocracy. Even today, some families who walk the corridors of power carry the secret mark of his desires. Charles left no great victories, lasting reforms, or promises of peace. What he left behind was a story. The story of silk and sin, theater and power, love, lust, and legacy. And perhaps that was what he wanted most. Not to be remembered as a hero or a saint, but to be remembered unequivocally as a man who lived by his own rules. Charles II turned the throne of England into a brothel, and the crown into a symbol of pleasure. And in doing so, he wrote the most unforgettable and scandalous chapter in British history.